New York City, Midtown Manhattan, Monday morning, August 19, 1935, just after 11:20 a.m. The kind of late summer morning where the sun makes the sidewalks look clean even when they're not, where men in suits move fast, pretending they aren't sweating, where money walks like it owns the air. And inside a restaurant that prided itself on white tablecloths, quiet voices, and proper clientele, a waiter in a pressed jacket looked at a black man in a dark suit and decided, without thinking too hard, that the rules of the old world still applied. The black man was Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, 30 years old, Harlem's rising power. Not a myth yet, but already a name that made certain men lower their voices. Bumpy wasn't in Midtown for a show. He wasn't there to stunt. He was there because he had a meeting that mattered, one of those meetings that decides how money moves through a city for the next 5 years. The restaurant was the kind of place that served bankers, judges, politicians, union men in clean suits, and businessmen who introduced themselves as importers, even though everyone understood what they really imported. Bumpy walked in like he belonged there, because in his mind, he did. Dark suit, crisp shirt, tie knotted tight, shoes polished so clean they looked wet, not flashy, not loud, controlled. The host at the front gave him the kind of look that wasn't a greeting. It was an evaluation, that quick scan some people do when they want to decide what you are before you open your mouth. Bumpy gave his name, calm, clear, no edge. The host hesitated, just long enough to make it obvious, then forced a smile and said, "Of course, Mr. Johnson," like he was surprised the words had to come out. Bumpy was shown to a corner table near the window, the kind of table reserved for private conversations, because the man Bumpy was meeting, a downtown attorney with political ties, had insisted on privacy, not because he feared Bumpy, because he feared what other people would think if they saw him talking to Bumpy. Bumpy sat, opened a folded newspaper without reading it, and waited. And then the waiter arrived. His name was Richard Malloy, 31 years old, thin smile, clean haircut. The kind of man who enjoyed the little power his job gave him, because it was the only kind of power he had. Malloy approached the table and didn't say, "Good morning," didn't say, "Welcome," didn't say, "How can I help you?" He looked down at Bumpy and said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "You lost?" A soft laugh came from somewhere behind him, not loud, not brave, the kind of laugh that stays small so it can pretend it didn't happen. Bumpy didn't react. He just looked up at Malloy with that stare that wasn't anger and wasn't fear. It was measurement. Malloy's mouth twitched, like Bumpy's silence bothered him. "You waiting for someone?" Malloy asked. Then, without waiting for an answer, he added, "Because this section is usually reserved." Bumpy's voice stayed level. "I'm meeting someone," he said. Malloy nodded slowly, like he didn't believe him. Then Malloy leaned in slightly and lowered his voice just enough to make it personal, but not enough to make it private. "You know," Malloy said, "there's places uptown that'll make you more comfortable." Bumpy didn't blink. Malloy straightened, did a little performance shrug, and said, "Coffee?" Bumpy nodded once. "Black," he said. Malloy wrote it down like he was doing Bumpy a favor. Then he walked away, and the restaurant went back to being the restaurant, forks clinking, soft voices, the gentle hum of money pretending it's civilized. Bumpy waited. Still, patient, because he wasn't a man who rushed. He'd survived long enough to understand. Rushing is how you make mistakes, and mistakes are how the city eats you. Malloy returned, carrying a silver tray, a coffee cup, a small pitcher. Sugar on the side, even though Bumpy hadn't asked for it. Everything arranged neatly. Malloy approached with the careful slowness of someone who wanted eyes on him. And then he stopped beside the table, paused like an actor finding his mark. "Here you go," Malloy said. He tilted the pitcher, and the coffee came out wrong. Not a spill the way accidents happen, not a splash, not a slip of the wrist. A full pour, boiling, straight down, onto Bumpy Johnson's lap and the edge of his left hand, like Malloy wanted the heat to land exactly where it would hurt the most. For half a second, the entire restaurant went quiet in that unnatural way it does when something crosses the line so clearly nobody can pretend it was normal. Bumpy's body flinched once, pure instinct, because boiling liquid doesn't ask permission. And then he went still again. You could smell it. That bitter coffee smell mixing with hot cloth and the sharp edge of pain. Malloy stepped back quickly, eyes wide, performing shock, then immediately hardened into something else. A grin tried to hide behind his face, the kind of grin men get when they think they did something clever. "Oh, my God," Malloy said, loud and theatrical. "I'm so sorry." And then he added, quiet enough to be cruel, loud enough for Bumpy to hear, "Guess you should have stayed where you belong." Bumpy looked down at the coffee spreading into the fabric of his suit. He looked at his left hand, where the skin had already turned angry red. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. Not frantic, not dramatic. Precise. He dabbed once, then again. Malloy watched him, waiting for anger, waiting for noise, waiting for the moment where the restaurant could say, "See? That's why he doesn't belong here." Bumpy lifted his eyes to Malloy's. Malloy's chin rose like he wanted to dare Bumpy to do something. Bumpy spoke softly, so softly Malloy had to lean forward to catch it. "You just made a decision," Bumpy said. Malloy scoffed. "What?" Bumpy's expression didn't change. "You decided you could do that in public," he said. "In this room." Malloy's mouth tightened. He glanced around like he suddenly remembered there were witnesses. Bumpy nodded slightly, as if acknowledging them too. Then Bumpy stood, slow, controlled, a man refusing to give anybody the satisfaction of seeing him scramble. He took his napkin, folded it carefully, placed it on the table like he was closing a file. Malloy's voice rose. "Hey, sir, if you're going to make a scene—" Bumpy cut him off with one calm sentence. "I'm not making a scene," Bumpy said. He paused, then added, "I'm leaving you one." And he walked out. No shouting, no swinging, no gun, no threat that could be quoted. Just a burned hand, a ruined suit, and the kind of quiet exit that makes a room uncomfortable because it feels unfinished. Malloy stood there holding the tray, still wearing his fake apology face. And the restaurant slowly returned to noise. Because people like to believe the world resets when they look away. But that morning didn't reset. Because by Friday, New York would be talking about boiling coffee like it was a gunshot. To understand why one waiter pouring boiling coffee on one man turned into a citywide eruption, you have to understand three things about Bumpy Johnson in 1935. First, Bumpy didn't treat disrespect like emotion. He treated it like information. If a man humiliates you in public, he's not just insulting you. He's announcing what he believes he can get away with. And if you let that announcement stand, it doesn't stop at pride. It becomes policy. Second, Bumpy understood the city's real structure, not what was written on paper, the structure of leverage. Who needed licenses? Who needed quiet? Who had secrets? Who couldn't survive daylight? Third, Bumpy was young, but he wasn't reckless. He had already learned the difference between violence and power. Violence creates headlines. Power creates rules. And Bumpy didn't want Malloy bleeding on the floor, because if Malloy bleeds, the restaurant becomes a victim. Bumpy wanted something else. He wanted the restaurant to become the criminal. When Bumpy left that restaurant, he didn't go back to Harlem first. He didn't go to a bar. He didn't go to his men. He went to a doctor, not a hospital, not an emergency room. A private physician, one of those quiet offices on the west side where men went when they didn't want questions. The doctor's name was Dr. Leonard Price, a man who treated boxers, politicians, and occasionally men whose injuries didn't come from legal work. Price took one look at Bumpy's hand and said, "Second-degree burn. You're lucky it wasn't worse." Bumpy didn't answer right away. He watched. The doctor apply ointment with careful hands. Then Bumpy asked one question. "How long will it show?" Price hesitated. "A while," he said. "A burn like this doesn't disappear overnight." Bumpy nodded. "Good," he said, because Bumpy wasn't thinking like a victim. He was thinking like a man who understood evidence. He left the doctor's office and made his first call from a payphone. Not to a killer, to a lawyer. A man named Theodore Green, the kind of attorney who could walk into a courtroom at noon and a back room at midnight without changing his voice. Green answered on the second ring. "Mr. Johnson," he said. Bumpy's voice stayed quiet. "I need you," he said. "Today." Green didn't ask why. He heard something in Bumpy's tone and understood this wasn't about money. "What happened?" Green asked. Bumpy answered in one sentence. "A waiter poured boiling coffee on me and thought it was funny." Silence. Then Green said, very calmly, "Where?" Bumpy told him. Green didn't say, "We'll sue." He didn't say, "We'll call the papers." He asked the only question that mattered. "Do you want this to stay quiet, or do you want this to become a problem?" Bumpy looked at his bandaged hand. Then he said the sentence that started the chain reaction. "I want the city to remember it." The second call Bumpy made was to a man who ran information the way other men ran numbers. His name was Solomon "Solly" Marks. Marks was quiet, precise. The kind of man who could find out who owned what, who owed what, and what a man had hidden behind paperwork. Bumpy told Marks, "I want everything on that restaurant." Marks asked, "Everything?" Bumpy said, "Everything. Owners, licenses, backers, debt, tax problems, union issues, supplier contracts, police friendships, anything that looked clean on the outside but dirty underneath." The third call was the one that made this bigger than Bumpy. He called Reverend Calvin Hawkins, a Harlem minister with a sharp voice and real influence. Hawkins didn't owe Bumpy. He didn't work for him. But Hawkins respected one thing, results. Bumpy told him what happened. Hawkins went silent. Then he said, "You want me to speak on it?" Bumpy's answer was simple. "I want you to tell the truth," he said, "and I want you to tell it loud." By that night, Bumpy had a plan, not a revenge plan, a pressure plan. 3 parts moving together. Make it undeniable, not rumor, not hearsay. Proof. Make it public at the right moment, when people were already tense, already watching, already tired of pretending. Make the consequence look lawful, so nobody could frame Bumpy as a thug. Because Bumpy understood something about New York in 1935. New York can ignore private pain. But New York struggles to ignore a scandal that shows up wearing paperwork. The next morning, Theodore Green met Bumpy in Harlem. Green brought a camera, a small one, not flashy, but clear enough to make the truth stick. He photographed the burn, close up, sharp. Bandage lifted just long enough to show the damage. He photographed the ruined suit, the coffee stain spread like a bruise. Then Green asked, "Do you remember the waiter's face?" Bumpy said, "I remember everything." Green nodded. "Good," he said, "because we're going to make this simple." Meanwhile, Solly Marks started digging, and by Wednesday afternoon he already had something, because the restaurant wasn't clean. It looked clean. But that's different. It had a public owner and a hidden backer. the kind of arrangement New York restaurants used when they wanted investment money that didn't ask questions. The liquor license renewal was approaching. The books didn't match the receipts. Suppliers had contracts that skirted rules, and the staff hated management. Because men who treat customers like they're lesser usually treat employees the same way. Thursday morning, Reverend Hawkins preached a sermon that started calm and ended sharp. He didn't mention Bumpy by name. He didn't need to. He told Harlem a story about a black man in a suit who went downtown for business and was scalded like he was a joke. He said the city still had people who believed humiliation was entertainment. And then he said the line that made it spread. If they can do it to a man with power, imagine what they do to men with none. Harlem listened, and Harlem did what it always does when something feels true. It talked. Barbershops, stoops, churches, corners. The story moved like smoke. By Friday, the story reached downtown reporters. Not all of them, just the ones who liked scandal. A columnist heard boiling coffee and Midtown restaurant and Harlem figure and made calls. A photographer started sniffing, and Bumpy, quietly, did the next move. He filed a complaint. Formal, legal, clean, assault, intentional harm, discrimination. And attached to it were photos of the burn, not a story, not a rumor. Proof. That same day, copies of those photos landed mysteriously in 3 places: a Harlem paper, a downtown editor's desk, and a labor organizer who understood exactly how to turn heat into action. Saturday morning, New York read the headline over coffee and felt their stomachs tighten. Because boiling coffee is intimate. It's not a distant insult. It's heat on skin. It's pain you can picture. And once people could picture it, they couldn't unpicture it. The restaurant tried to protect itself in the dumbest way possible. They lied. They told reporters it was an accident. They claimed Bumpy lunged and knocked the pitcher. They implied he caused a scene. But reporters loved a lie they could break, and the break came fast. A white woman came forward, society type, Midtown. She said, no, he poured it on him. 1. Sentence. That single sentence did more damage than any angry speech ever could, because it removed New York's favorite excuse, uncertainty. Now it wasn't maybe. Now it was he did it. Sunday afternoon, a protest formed outside the restaurant. Not huge at first, 20 people, signs, quiet chants, then 60, then 100. And the restaurant's managers watched from behind glass, furious that their classy place had become a sidewalk event. They called the police. The police arrived and pushed. A young man was shoved into a newspaper stand. A camera caught it, and suddenly the story wasn't only boiling coffee. It was everything underneath it: disrespect, power, who gets to stand where, who gets to touch whom. By Monday, New York lost it. Radio hosts talked about it like it was proof the city hadn't changed. Harlem talked about it like it was a warning. Downtown men complained about unrest while secretly reading every article. Politicians smelled danger, because politicians can survive moral arguments, but they struggle to survive contagious outrage. The restaurant made its second mistake. They fired Malloy quietly and thought the problem would fade. But firing the waiter didn't remove the heat. It confirmed guilt. And now Malloy, jobless, angry, scared, started talking. He went to his bar in Queens and drank too much and said the sentence that sealed everything. I did what they wanted, he said. They told me to put him in his place. Somebody heard it. And in New York, information moves faster than trains. By Tuesday morning, Solly Marks handed Bumpy a folder. Inside were the restaurant's pressure points, a liquor license renewal date, evidence the books didn't match the receipts, a supplier arrangement that violated regulations, and 2 names, a city inspector and a union representative who had accepted envelopes before. Marks looked at Bumpy and said, "This place is a house of cards." Bumpy nodded. Good, he said. Because Bumpy wasn't trying to burn it down with fire. He was trying to pull one card and let it collapse itself. Theodore Green requested a hearing, official language that made city offices uncomfortable. At the same time, Reverend Hawkins announced a community meeting in Harlem. Hundreds showed up, not to riot, to organize. And that frightened Midtown more than shouting, because shouting fades, organization doesn't. A city inspector walked into the restaurant's kitchen with 2 more men behind him. And they found violations like they were looking for them, because most places break rules. They just don't get checked until someone powerful wants them checked. Citations were written, photos taken, warnings issued, and then the liquor authority sent a letter. Polite words like review and concern and pending decision. But the meaning was clear. Your protection is not guaranteed. Any more? The owner read it and felt his throat go dry. Because if you lose a liquor license in Midtown, you don't just lose alcohol sales, you lose your clientele. Men who come to do deals don't come for coffee. They come for privacy and a buzz. And once the buzz disappears, the deals go somewhere else. The restaurant tried to make a deal. They sent an emissary uptown, a man in a clean suit with an expensive watch and a careful smile. He sat across from Theodore Green and said, "We'd like to resolve this." Green didn't smile. "What does resolve mean?" Green asked. The emissary said, "We'll offer compensation." Green leaned forward slightly. "This isn't about compensation," he said. "This is about the city learning a lesson." The emissary's smile twitched. "What lesson?" he asked. Green answered plainly, "That you can't scald a man in public and expect your life to stay the same." The emissary left Harlem and went back downtown with a problem he couldn't solve with money. By the weekend, the protest doubled. More signs, more cameras, more chanting. A famous performer stood with the protesters long enough for a photograph. And a photograph is forever. Then one night, the restaurant's front window cracked. Not shattered, just cracked. No one proved who did it, but the crack mattered. It told the owner the truth. He wasn't controlling the street anymore, and soon he wouldn't be controlling the licenses either. He reached out to people who handled problems quietly. He asked if pressure could be applied to Bumpy Johnson, and the answer made him colder than coffee. "Not over this," the contact said. "This isn't only business," the voice added. "This is pride, and the city's watching. You touch him now, you make him a martyr. And then you'll really see New York lose it." The owner hung up and realized he had fewer friends than he thought. By midweek, the FAR Liquor Authority suspended the license temporarily, pending investigation. The sentence was polite. The effect was brutal. The restaurant started bleeding money. Employees panicked. Suppliers demanded payment up front. Waiters started looking for new jobs. Chefs started taking calls. And the staff whispered. Whispers became stories. Stories about bribes. Stories about cash. Stories about backroom deals. Those stories reached investigators. And investigators did what they do when the smell is strong enough. They started opening drawers. Finally, the owner agreed to meet Theodore Green and Reverend Hawkins together. He arrived tired. Not physically tired, soul tired. Green spoke first. "You will issue a public apology," he said. "Not vague, not if anyone was offended. Specific. You will announce a non-discrimination policy," Green continued. "You will reopen under that policy, and you will submit to a public community review. Respected Harlem. Figures will come in, and they will be served properly with cameras present." Hawkins spoke softly. "This isn't about humiliating you," he said. "It's about ending the habit." The owner swallowed. "What about the damages?" he asked. Green's answer was cold. "The damages are already happening." Then the owner asked the question he couldn't stop thinking about. "And Mr. Johnson?" he said. What does he want? Hawkins looked at him and said simply, "He wants you to understand the difference between power and permission." The owner signed, not because he found morality, because the city had turned on him like a machine. 2 days later, the restaurant issued a public statement. Apology, policy change, commitment. And New York reacted the way New York always reacts when a powerful place bends. It pretended it had always been inevitable. A week later, the community review happened. Well-dressed Harlem professionals walked in, sat at tables, ordered coffee. The staff served them carefully. The manager smiled too hard. Cameras took photos. And that was the moment the city realized this wasn't only about Bumpy Johnson. It was about the old rules being forced to change when pressure was applied the right way. People always asked what happened to Richard Malloy, the waiter. Here's what's known. Malloy tried to disappear into Queens, tried to live like the story would fade. But New York doesn't let a face like that fade once it becomes symbolic. He was questioned. His story didn't match witnesses. He was charged with enough to stain him. And then the quiet punishment arrived. He stopped getting hired. Because restaurants don't like waiters who turn dining rooms into front-page news. Malloy drank harder. He talked too much. He told the wrong story to the wrong person one night, and ended up in a fight that left him with a scar across his cheek. No one proved who did it. No one needed to, because the scar became its own message. He moved away months later, quietly, not killed, erased from the city's good life, because some punishments don't involve graves. They involve doors closing. Bumpy Johnson never gave a triumphant interview about any of this. When a reporter asked him later if the incident had been resolved, Bumpy gave an answer that sounded like nothing and meant everything. He held up his left hand, still marked faintly, and said, "Heat teaches." 2 words. But New York understood. Because New York had watched a man get scalded in public, then watched a midtown institution start shaking. And the lesson wasn't only for waiters, it was for managers, for owners, for men who thought tradition protected them. The real aftermath wasn't the apology, it was what changed in the city's behavior, because after that incident, something shifted. Not everywhere, not magically. But in certain rooms, certain men started hesitating before doing casual humiliation. They still had prejudice, they still had arrogance, but now they had a new calculation. Is this worth consequences? Because consequences are what New York respects. New York can rationalize violence, but New York struggles to rationalize a scandal that pulls licenses, triggers audits, and turns a respectable place into a public warning. That's why the city lost it. Because it wasn't only a burn, it was a reveal. A reveal that showed how close the city still was to the old world, and how fragile that old world became when a man with patience decided he didn't want revenge. He wanted a rule. And the rule that came out of boiling coffee was simple. You can humiliate people when you think they have no leverage. You can do it when they're alone. You can do it when you believe nobody will care. But when you humiliate the wrong man in public, in a city built on reputation, you don't just create anger. You create a plan, and plans in New York outlast nights. They become policy. They become cautionary tales. They become the reason a waiter's hand shakes the next time he wants to teach someone a lesson. Because the truth is, Bumpy Johnson didn't need to throw a punch to win that morning. He didn't need to fire a shot. He just needed to leave, burned, and let the city watch what happens when consequences arrive, dressed like paperwork. That was 1935. That was Midtown Manhattan. That was boiling coffee poured with contempt. And that was New York learning, again, that disrespect isn't only personal, it's political, it's economic. And if you're careless enough to do it in public, you might find the city turning on you like it has teeth, because you can't pour boiling coffee on a man. and expect your world to stay cool. Not in Harlem City, not in New York, and not when the man you scalded has spent his whole life learning how to turn the city's own machinery into a weapon. A waiter threw boiling coffee on Bumpy Johnson, and New York lost it, not because cruelty surprised anyone, but because, just for a moment, cruelty finally came with a bill.